I'm a new faculty here. I started in January, so just a couple of months here. And what I'm going to talk about today is one of the main thrusts of my research agenda. I have a lot of different research work, but within 20 to 30 minutes, I didn't have time to squeeze much more. So I decided to keep the focus on critical thinking. So in this talk, I hope to make you realize that we, like any one of us, may be easily misled when we are not actively and consciously engaging in critical thinking when we are being presented with information. And I'll discuss how we can cultivate critical thinking through a few of my projects. So we are commonly exposed to claims made by different peoples about various topics, and oftentimes these claims are accompanied by data and charts to provide supporting evidence of the argument. And hardcore numbers are important because they present an objective stance at the problem at hand. But these numbers and charts, which are the cornerstone of evidence-based reasoning, are they always truthful? So my answer to that is yes and no, and I will show you why in just a second. So I'd like to start with an example. You may have seen President Trump bragging about his victory a year ago while showing off this map in front of you here. So what this map shows is the margin of victory for all of the counties in the United States. So it's an easy map to read. So basically, the redder a county, the more Republican voted for Trump, obviously, and the darker blue, the more Democrat. And naturally, what we think when looking at this map is that Trump's victory is not questionable because the map is obviously like a very red. So here we have 80% of the map in red, 20% in blue, but it's not to be mistaken, misunderstood as 80% of the population. That's not what this map is showing here. So to see a real reflection of how many citizens voted for each candidate, we'd better show a bar chart, such as this one here on the right. So what we see here is reality, as we all know, that it was pretty tight. The victory was, in fact, if we were to consider the popular vote, we all know that Hillary was leading the popular vote by a couple of hundred of thousand votes. And so I actually like this chart, and this is why I picked this one, because we can look at the evolution over the years. And what I find interesting in this visualization is that it doesn't seem actually that more people have flipped Republican over the years, because the past also, but rather it's a huge portion of the Democrat sympathizer who just didn't support Hillary. So it's pretty dramatic how the number of Democrat voters has dropped over the years, and by how much it's about like half, it seems, since 2008. All right, let me stop here. Who did buy my argument right now? Who didn't? Why so?
You don't know the composition of the print back.
Sorry, what?
You don't know the composition, who goes into the print.
Which composition? Who goes in?
Oh,
yeah, Justin. Okay, so I heard the correct answer here. So I've been showing you this graph, but if you pay close attention, the y-axis is not starting at 0. And this is a real actual graph, like showing the baseline starting at 0. So while we still see a decrease in the number of voters in the in the Democrat Party, it's not as dramatic as the other chart suggests. So the bottom line is that, and the point I'm trying to say here is, the bottom chart is truthful because it's not lying. We have all of the information that we need to recollect, how many people have been voting over the years, and there's no intent of, disguising anything. But it's not so truthful because it requires an effort to correctly interpret, right? And it's easy to fall into the trap of too quickly and overconfidently reading even the simplest visualization. I'm sure some of you in the room didn't pay attention to the y-axis, and we're totally going to buy my argument that half of the people didn't vote anymore in the Democrat Party, right? And so distorting this scale is a very common technique in communication. People use and abuse of it. There are countless examples of it, and in the news, just if you look at the same topic, This was some charts presented during the campaigns to show who was the leader during the campaigns. And I like that this journalist has created many such examples, and he shows here an analysis of how the different charts actually exaggerate the appearance of Trump in the lead, so by changing the baseline, so this is showing the baseline, and the ones that are more or less fair to the data, and the ones that are on the contrary, like diminishing Trump's lead and favoring Hillary. So by just manipulating the visual here, you can give somebody a different impression about the data that you have. So what I'm trying to say is that we can't always trust ourselves, neither can we others, but we cannot even trust ourselves when it comes to interpreting the data that we are seeing visually, that is presented to us. And so I'm going to articulate the rest of my talk around the three questions as follows, and we'll see how these relate to critical thinking. So how well do we understand the data that we see every day? Why do I start with this? It's because it's important to understand if people understand the data, because if data is too abstract, if people don't even understand the data that we're talking about, one doesn't even pass the state of critical thinking. They just don't understand the subject matter in the first place. And so it's important to appreciate how perhaps sometimes we're bad at understanding the data that we see every day. So I have an example here. How many of you are drinking pop? I see somebody with a can. Yeah, we had some for lunch. So probably many of us in this room here. Do you know how much sugar there is in these individual packages? All right. 39 grams of sugar, 42 grams of sugar for the middle one, and 65 grams of sugar. But how much is that? My sense of scale is not so good when it comes to appreciate the amount of sugar that is in aliments, right? And 39 of sugar, I cannot tell if I know that it's too much, but I don't know if it's too much, like too much or too much, okay, too much. And so, like, to have a better appreciation of that, like perhaps something that would be good is to change the actual representation of this value. So what if I translate these quantities in terms of sugar cubes now? So this is what you have in all of these different containers. When you drink a can of Coke, you are actually consuming 9 solid sugar cubes. I doubt that any of you in the room would put 9 sugar cubes in their coffee, even if you own a very big mug. It seems that it's a lot. And so to go even like further, if you don't know, like the recommended daily intake is 25 grams of sugar. So how much is that? We can see here. And so basically, if you drink just one can of pop, you've already gone 4 more sugar cubes than recommended on your daily basis. So the message I'm trying to convey here is that even the simplest data, 39 grams of sugar, should be considered simple data because we encounter it on a daily basis. We consume it on a daily basis. So even the simplest data may be difficult to interpret if we're not, actively thinking about it. And using a different representation, using sugar cubes here, can help. Let's take another example here. So I like very much that in Manhattan, people can see the big billboard that constantly updates to show the current US gross debt, national debt. So this was like a couple of months ago. The debt is $20+ trillion at the moment. So how much is that? $20+ trillion. It's a lot. But how much a lot? We'll see in a minute. But before we move on, I'd like to show you that the Canadian version of the debt clock, because it exists. I figured that out while preparing my slides, and well, more precisely, has existed. This is a footage of 2011, and I very much like that it was like mounted on a car, and the clock has been touring in the country in 2011. So it's a great effort to raise awareness, like to the citizen about how much the country that we live in, like own to the rest of the world. So back to the figure, and we're going to focus on the US debt because it's more impressive. And so it's like while $500 billion is still like, way beyond my human scale. Like $20+ trillion is very difficult to appreciate. So how much exactly is that? And so, well, like what I'm going to show you here is a short video where we, in a similar fashion as we've been using a sugar cube to express how much sugar, here we're going to express the $20 trillion in terms of $100 bills, which is an object or an amount that people commonly manipulate and can relate to more easily. So we start by the $100 bill, and then we're going to progressively, my video wants to launch. And we're going to progressively build up so that we can see like how many 100 bills we need to make up 10,000, then this is 1 million. And $100 million, and you see that there's a human here to give a better sense of scale. Remember these things that I point during the video. So the there we have a plane. We're gone to like 1 trillion, and this is like the area that $100 bill stacked on top of one another would make to make up $1 trillion. And notice that you have some fields on the side to give you a sense of scale in the plane as well, to just appreciate the amount of bills that this means. So this is still 1 trillion, and we see still the human there in the bottom. Now on to the $20 trillion, and we see those stacks of bills that's just like grains, like a skyscraper surrounding the Statue of Liberty, which is kind of oppressed by this amount of money. Obviously, the video is meant to be dramatic and to make this message across. The music will be very heavy as I talk over the video. But this is what $20 billion would look like if you were to stack $100 bills close to the Statue of Liberty. So this is very impressive, but I believe that this gives everybody like a better appreciation of how much this amount of money that we cannot imagine because we never manipulate so much money. I mean, I don't, and so it's by making it relatable to you through this $100 bill and appreciate like how much volume it would take in a space that is familiar to do, that to you it may help. And so this technique is something that we've been interested in with colleagues of mine, and we coined this technique as concrete scale in visualization. Basically, it conveys a complex measure by re-expressing it using familiar objects from the real world. And we've seen an example of the sugar cubes and the $100 bill. And the complex measure can be complex because the scale that we're talking about is difficult to apprehend, like the sugar scale is difficult in terms of grams. Decibels are difficult also. And it can be complex because of the magnitude that goes way beyond human perceptible scale. And so the key is to use familiar objects and landmarks to help with the sense of scale and visually use one or several of these the following cognitive mechanisms. So in the video, you've seen anchor and adjustment. It's the technique of using, for example, the Statue of Liberty to give you an appreciation of the size of things that surround it. So it's using a landmark that is common to you, and then you can relate how much the difference is there. Unitization was a technique used with the sugar cube. Instead of using the measure in which the measure is expressed, you're using a different unit, the sugar cube in our case. And analogy, you all know analogies. Basically, in this example, it would be if the Earth would be a basketball, the moon would be a tennis ball, the size of a tennis ball. And this is an analogy, taking two objects that you're familiar with to see like a relative relationship between the objects. So how well do we understand the data that we see every day? Well, some measure, the answer to that is some measure may be difficult to grasp, and relating data to more familiar concepts can help address this issue. So to solve even before engaging in critical thinking, let's try just to understand the data we talk about. So that was my first point. Second point is how well do we understand the data that is represented visually? And when being presented with a visual representation of data, as we saw in the introduction, it is not granted that the audience will get the right, the right mental model about what we're talking about. So it's not obvious that somebody will be able to recollect that or to reconstruct that the baseline somewhere else when you present the chart on the left. And so being able to understand visualizations is becoming an essential skill because we encounter them on a daily basis in the news, on your mobile phones as you track your activity and so on. So it's important that we are able as a society to understand these charts. And we've seen in our previous examples that visualization can be deceptively simple, and this is where the danger is. So here are some more examples of visualization that can be deceptive or misleading. First, by design, because probably the intent was such. So let me show you this example here. So in this chart, it represents the number of murders committed using firearms in Florida. So that's the data over the year. And we have one key point in 2005. That's when the law in Florida, like the stand your ground law, was enacted. So what do you see here? What happened right after the law was enacted? Most of you probably, like if you don't think about it too much, probably you see a huge fall off in the number of gun deaths after the law has passed, because that's what the graphics is telling you at first sight. But that's not what the graphs show. If you pay close attention, you can see that the x-axis is upside down. So number of deaths grow as you go downwards. And which means what seems to be a highest peak in this visualization here actually correspond to lowest murders and the opposite way around. And if you are to look at the same version of the graph but put upside down, flipped vertically, this is how we can more naturally read the data. So the proper conclusion to my question, what happened after the law was enacted, well, the gun deaths just skyrocketed and had this major rise right after the law. So the graph is deceptive by design because it's been put upside down, and this is not aligning with our expectations when we see bar chart. Visualization can be misleading because of perceptual biases also. So for instance, the choropleth maps, which is an example that I showed in the beginning, they very poorly convey proportions here because the data in each region, like if you take Texas versus Maine, for example, the area that the different states occupy is very different. And if you have to appreciate the distribution of things over the map, it's not very fair to the data because a bigger state will be more visually prominent than another one. And so if you consider each state as a unit and you want to compare the values, it's better to use representations such as this one, where every state is being devoted the same screen relay state. And we cannot fight against that because that's how our brain is wired, that's perceptual biases. And so we call the skills, like being able to identify this perceptual bias, be aware and identify those biases, like in design, in our own perceptual model, is a set of skills that enable us to accurately interpret and then potentially create visualization. This is called as visualization literacy. So research suggests that the general population has very limited visualization literacy. So together with colleagues, we set out to start working on that space and looking at where it all starts and asking the question, where and when do we learn these skills? When, if you try to recollect, when was the first time that you've been encountering a bar chart or a graph? So in fact, we encounter these visualization very early on in our scholarly, back at elementary school. And so we've been to schools and we've studied what are the visual representations that are presented in textbooks, in math books, in grades K to 4. And we also interviewed elementary school teachers to understand what are their practices and what they present, how they teach visualization and when. And so like we created a lot of visual examples from these books, about 2,600 visual representation for in about 5,000 textbook pages, like very committed to this, I guess. It's been a lot to encode. But I'm not going to tell all of the insights that we gained, but one of the most silent findings in this study is we observed this gradual progression towards more abstract representation. So as with our kids, we are manipulating objects a lot, like physical objects, and then representation, like high fidelity representation of objects and low fidelity representation of the same objects. And then eventually we move on to tokens that represent an object. It's not anymore an image of the object, it's just a token, let's say 1 unit of this object. And then all the way to bar graphs. So this is in fact a common pedagogical strategy that is called concreteness fading, and it echoes with what we can see also in comics. If you're familiar with Scott McCloud's degree of abstraction, like starting with more concrete photographic representation, then moving to illustration, to abstract icons, and finally to notations. So we are being taught in this progressive manner. But what was interesting, though, is that if we did encounter this progression, we did not encounter the same data encoded at different abstraction levels. And we found that there was an opportunity here to say like, well, maybe kids can learn better if they see the whole progression of the same collection of objects, from the objects all the way to the bar charts. And so this is what we've contributed here with C'est la Vise, which is a tablet-based educational tool that to teach children about bar charts, how to read bar charts. And so I'm going to show you a quick video of the tool in action. So here we have synchronized views of the fish as objects on the left and the bar chart of the same objects on the right. And by interacting, the children can explore the relationship between the two views by just clicking on the bars and the objects. And we have also like an animation mode where you have this progressive animation from the objects to the ordered objects to pictographs all the way to bar charts. And so these are pretty common techniques. Yeah, this is a kid of my colleague, Sally, so she was very excited about the tool. Not a participant. Yeah, what I was going to say is these are very common techniques that we know and are very powerful in visualizations, but that have not been leveraged yet in education for educational purposes, at least for this kind of to teach children about visualization. And so we deployed this application. This was very exciting, deploying this application in classrooms. So we did deploy in classrooms in grade K and 2. 21 children participated in this. And we found, as amazing as this may sound to people in this room who have kids, I don't have kids, but I know that keeping kids focused, especially at this age, focused and interested for 30 minutes in a row is a challenge. And we took that challenge and it worked out. So they were very engaged and interested with the tablet for the whole duration. It might be due to the novelty effect, but still it's pretty encouraging. This was predictable, but perhaps this is also due to the novelty effect. The introduction to the new technology in the class was disruptive to the class dynamics. Perhaps as children see more of those deployed, it may not be as disruptive. We are happy to see that children interacted a lot with no to minimal guidance. They were able to complete all of the activities because we made them do actual work with the visualization, like complete a bar chart so that you match the two views. And it was also, this one is a very important finding. It was great to see children engage in peer learning. So they were paired up in groups. And children explained to each other what it was about while verbalizing key visualization concept. And I learned from the elementary school teachers that verbalizing knowledge is very rare at this age, and because children do their stuff and they don't actually verbalize what they're doing and what they're thinking. And we've observed that with as they were trying to explain one another what was going on. And finally, while we did not formally evaluate the learning power of our approach, we came back a week after the activity on the tablet and could observe children successfully complete drawing activities, written exercises, building on the concept they learned through interacting with the tool. So we did not formally evaluate that, but we observed some retention of the knowledge, which is encouraging, but more formal validation is obviously necessary here. So how well do we understand data that is represented visually? So, well, decoding and understanding visualization is a very complex activity. We saw that we can be easily misled. It's a complex activity that requires knowledge and skill, and by educating people, visualization education can help solve some of the problems that we face today. Third point and final point is how well can we communicate data visually, and here I mean authoring, creating visualization. So I told you that earlier that visualization literacy encompasses both the ability to extract information, read information, but also the ability to communicate data in a visual form as truthfully as possible. The problem is that the tools that we have at hand nowadays to create visualization are mostly reserved tech-savvy people. You need to know how to code or to know at least how to manipulate things in the computer. And in fact, this may be a huge barrier to people engaging with data that may really help them. And I believe that actively taking part in the process of working with data and visual representation is a good step toward developing critical thinking, because you kind of understand how data function, how to manipulate data, how you represent data, and you maybe raise your own awareness about your biases and so on. And there are some projects that I really like, such as this one, that allows the general population to engage with data and data visualization through simple tools like drawing and coloring. So here is a coloring book. Well, basically it's like you have several pages and you have like a paint by number on the left hand. You just follow the instruction and you engage in making your own visualization by just coloring the cells, which is great to educate people about climate. And I like this other one because it's a kind of reference to the concrete scales. This is how much surface is being oh, sorry, I copy-pasted the same thing. That's not what it represents. It's how much surface of deforestation that is happening in the world in 1 minute. And the challenge is to be able to color all of these soccer fields within 1 minute. That's how much, how many trees that are being cut off on that time. So data can be very personal, but it can be also playful. Like if we don't have this barrier of knowing the technology, in this project called Dear Data, 2 artists decided to collect data every week about themselves and send each other a postcard representing this data in a very personal and artistic manner. As you can see, that is very whimsical visualization here. So for instance, just to give you an instance, that's an example of the doors that one of the artists, Georgia, has opened in the week. They would pick a theme, like that was the doors that week. And so she collected a bunch of features about the doors, where it was, whether it was a glass door, a wooden door, an elevator door, if it was heavy, etc. And here she plotted the doors she opened, representing all of the characteristics of each door as a glyph. And so if you think about it a minute, with current data visualization or drawing tools, this is extremely difficult to achieve if you were to program, or very time consuming if you were to draw them manually. And so you can engage in doing your own visualization if you get the kit. So, it was meant to be, I will just play the video here and then play it again. So it is difficult actually to draw something and bind it to data. So in this project that I collaborated on with Haijun Jia, Daniel Victor, Bruno Darojo at UFT, and also Nathalie Rich at Microsoft Research, we actually set out to reconcile this flexibility of hand drawing and the possibility to bind visual characteristics of our drawings to data. And so in this example here, I'm showing negative emotion. So each drop corresponds to a recorded emotion. And the bigger the drop, the stronger the emotion. And the darker the drop, the more negative the emotion. And so drawing this manually would take forever. And so we had this system where you can actually draw a sample drop, and then you can, by clicking on the different objects, you access their like data characteristic, and you can actually bind the real data to visual characteristics of this object. So this is a project that has just been accepted to CHI conference, and by June we'll be presenting this much better and much more in depth than I'm doing now. So I have here another example of somebody who did like a very compelling one. It doesn't work. You see that? So just to show that it can be very complex. This is like all of the thank you that the people have been giving to somebody, so you can like really customize like the different glyphs. I'm not saying that this one is like easy to perform because the tool still needs a little bit of learning, but you can like draw real glyphs and bind them to data in a much more flexible manner than you could before. So how well we can communicate data visually? There are many challenges, but reconciling creative drawing and data binding, I believe that we can engage people with data and make them like more aware of what is data and how to work with data, and have them think more. So to conclude, I know I'm a little bit over time, and I apologize for that. I'm wrapping up right now. To conclude, being a critical thinker when presented with evidence-based reasoning remains a challenge because there are many difficulties to that activity. One of which is that data is always noisy and dirty and uncertain, and so is the way we portray and perceive this data. And so by cultivating critical thinking through these three actions, making data relatable, educate people about data and visualization, and engage people in thinking with and through data in a creative manner and personal manner, we can progress toward a more informed citizenry, I believe, where people can actively engage in data-driven critical thinking. With that, I'd like to thank you and apologize to Ishtiaque for being a few minutes over time.
Yes. All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Wonderful talk. I was like thinking of like sitting there more and like looking at this presentation, but unfortunately now I have to present something here. So I'm Ishtiaque Ahmed. I'm a new assistant professor here at University of Toronto, and I've got 20 minutes. So I'll be talking about design for voice. So here is something. Here's kind of like a overview of my talk today. First, I'll be talking about my research objective and approach. Then I'll be talking about my research question, walk you through a couple of projects that I've been doing, and then I'll be talking about some of the work that I want to do in my future. Here are something that I'm from Bangladesh, and I grew up in Bangladesh in 90s when there were not like many technologies, computer and mobile phones started to coming in, and they were changing people's life. And I wanted to understand what are the real challenges of their life and how technology is actually changing the way they live. So I built a human-computer interaction research group here in Bangladesh, and with these people and others, for the last 8 or 9 years, I have been working with different marginalized populations in Bangladesh, including the ready-made garments workers, taxi drivers, mobile phone repairers, rickshaw drivers, and many others. So my work is kind of in the intersection between HCI and ICTD. And by ICTD, it means that you design and develop technologies in a resource-constrained environment in the global south. You probably know about this community radio, mobile phone, mobile money, or one laptop per child projects, which are very like signature projects in ICTD. All of them have success stories, but most of the stories in ICTD are failure stories. It's very hard to have a successful technology in the global south. But why? People have tried to find a lot of reasons why technologies which work so smoothly in this part of the world actually fail when they travel to the global south. And they found that the main problem here is that sometimes we do not actually understand the problem, we misread the problem, then we don't think about the long-term sustainability of the problem. We design and we come back from the field, and then the technology fails and we don't care about it because the project is done. And then the cultural impact, sometimes we solve one problem, but that generates countless of other problems in the field that we don't think about. So that's why in my research, I try to understand people and then build technologies. So in summary, I call it a combination of ethnography and connectivity, and I draw stuff from social sciences and then mix that with computer science thing. Now the research question that I ask is kind of starts right where Fanny ends, that if you have data, you can do a lot of beautiful things with this data. We now live in a world that is full of data. We get data from social media, we get data from news media, we get data from books and countless of other sources. But there are many other people whose data we do not still get. For example, there are 1 in every 5 people in the world are illiterate and they do not read and write, and their data is not with us. And there are also different kinds of data that we do not get. For example, the victims of sexual harassment, they do not talk about their harassment. They are social and cultural taboos. We don't get this data. Ready-made factory workers, countless of workers around the world, they do not speak of their experience in the factory because they are afraid that they may lose their job. Refugees, they also do not want to talk about their experiences because they feel that they are illegal in the new country. So these people do not have voice, which I define as a comprehensive socio-technical process for obtaining freedom. If you cannot raise your voice, you are not actually free. But how can we give these people voice? That's the kind of the overarching research question that I try to address in my research. And I say that there are 4 components of voice: access, freedom, visibility, and infrastructure. So I ask, how can technology be accessible to all so that people can use that technology for raising their voice? Or freedom, how can they freely talk using the technology? And then there's visibility part, how we can appreciate their voice, and the infrastructure, how can we give them the identity so that they can stand for their voice. So in today's talk, I'll be mostly talking about these 2 projects and then just briefly browse through the other 2 projects. First, access. So as I said, 1 in every 5 people in the world are illiterate. Then there are many other people who are semi-literate or low literate, cannot use technologies the way we use. And it's not that the engineers haven't tried to address this problem. They're electrical and computer engineers who built really affordable computer networks and very inexpensive mobile phones. So now people in the remote part of the world can also use the mobile phone. But there is still one challenge, that those people who are illiterate cannot still get the 100% out of their mobile phones because it's very difficult for an illiterate person to use a mobile phone. Think about this, if you do not understand what's written on your mobile phone, how can you use that, right? So different researchers tried to solve this problem using different ways too. For example, great work from Microsoft Research came out in 2006. They tried to replace the text with images. So instead of having the names of your contacts on your list, you use their pictures. But the problem here is that how can you search with pictures? And also you have to memorize now the picture of each of the people that you talk to, which is not also practical. It turned out that people can do well when their contact list is below 30, and if it goes beyond that, then people start struggling. Then another group in Carnegie Mellon, in a similar time, they started to address the same problem with voice instead of interacting with, the visual manner. Why don't we talk to the phone? Kind of like this Cortana or Siri. But the problem here is also the same. Now you have to memorize what do you need to say to make your phone do what. So it's kind of like you now memorize the audio cues. When I was looking at this problem, I found that in all of this design solution, they were kind of assuming that one mobile phone will be used by one user. So when that one user is not able to use the sort of technology that you designed for them, then we call it an accessibility problem, and we start adding features to the technology to address this accessibility. However, in that part of the world, in the global south, most of the time, the use of technology is shared. A mobile phone is shared among a family or a group of friends. So it's not that one technology is associated with one person, and if one person in that group is literate and can use the phone, then everybody in the group can actually use the phone. So I was trying to understand how I can use this social dynamics in the use of a more accessible mobile phone. So I worked with a group of rickshaw drivers in Dhaka, the capital of Bangladesh. The area name was Kamrangichor. I conducted a 6 months long ethnography there to understand how they actually use the mobile phone. Turned out that these people's use of mobile phone has an ecology. So all of them were using mobile phones, but none of them was actually able to use the phone by their own. So whenever they wanted to call somebody, they would go to somebody they know, some literate person in their community, and would take their help. Now, it's not that they are just sharing their mobile phones. You know, most of the things that they have at their home is shared with their neighbors and with their friends. And we're trying to understand why were those people helping each other. It turned out that this is very much, human nature. Marcel Mauss, a famous social scientist, when he was doing his ethnography in northern part of California, he found that is how two tribes would meet each other and build community bonds by exchanging gifts, and that's how a community actually, creates and maintains the social bonding. Well, then what's the problem here? The problem here is that when the rickshaw drivers go outside for their work and when they do not have their friends around them, they don't get help, so they cannot use their mobile phone. So we started designing for this kind of remote help in a participatory design manner with this rickshaw drivers. We came up with a very simple solution. If I am an illiterate person, I cannot use my mobile phone, and if you are my friend, you can use my mobile phone. In my phone, I will just have one button. If I press that button, a call will be generated to you, and I will tell you who I want to talk to. Then you help me, you find the person in my mobile phone, because you can see that remotely, and the phone will be generated from my phone to the person I want to call to. And we had to go through all this computational manner to find out who the people who are helping, who are the helpers. It turned out it's a bipartite map. We had to do a lot of computer science technical stuff, which I'm skipping for now. We had to optimize the number of people who are helping, number of helps, and number of amount of money people are spending and the time. And then we came up with a very simple solution, which since there is no internet with the whole, and there are different kinds of mobile phones that they are using, it was a SMS-based application where we were zipping the SMS and sending them, whole communication protocol was implemented with SMS. So the final interface was super simple. So the illiterate user would get only one button on their screen. So whenever they wanted to place a call, they would press that button, and then they will be given the option of which helper they want to get help from. And they would select the person, it would be only one or two person they could take help from. And that helper would then see this person's contact list, missed call, dialed call, and then he would talk to them, and then select the person that the original user wants to talk to, and then the call would generate from the original caller's phone the person they want to call to. And we did this field deployment with 12 participants for 6 weeks, and we found that they were enjoying using it. We took their interviews, and they also reported that they liked the way it was going, and they also reported that it didn't only help them to maintain their communication, it also strengthened their community bonds because they are now exchanging more helps and gifts. We also then did a 6 months long longitudinal study, and we found that it was sustaining in their community, and they have also started learning, and at some point they are also willing to help others. And so helpee became helper at some point. And then BRAC, the largest NGO in the world, they now have started talking to us to deploy the same technology for their mobile money transaction system in the country. Now here, we are trying to extend the same thing for helping other communities, for example, visually impaired senior citizens or refugees, and we're thinking whether this can also be an employment source for underemployed people or refugees or part-timers, learners. There are some challenges that we are also working on with gender, with age, and with these different kinds of social dynamics. But the main message here is that oftentimes when we think about design user interface, we only think about people's cognitive ability and graphical user interface. But there are many social, political, and cultural aspects which we can also bring into the design, which do not probably work if we just think a person alone, but we situate them in the society and understand how they naturally work and bring those lessons to our design. Now the next thing is freedom. So now let's say everybody can use a mobile phone, but or computer. Can they now freely talk? The answer is no. For example, I started working with the victims of sexual harassment in Bangladesh. It was a rampant problem there. Like the newspapers were flooded with the reports of sexual harassment like every day. And it's still a problem, and it's a global problem. It's not a problem in Bangladesh. But the alarming part is that still most incidents of sexual harassment go unreported because women don't talk about it. They don't talk about it, you don't get a data, you cannot design, the whole HCI stops and you do nothing. So that's the problem, silence. So we started to understand why women are silent about this. So we first conducted an online survey, anonymous online survey. All the women, 120 women participated. They all said that they experienced sexual harassment, either directly or indirectly. And they also said that anybody in Bangladesh who grew up there faced sexual harassment, but they said that some people are brave enough to talk about it and others just remain silent. So we then we tried to understand this problem better. So we started conducting interviews in 3 universities in Bangladesh. We spent 1 year and we only got 11 interviews because women are not coming. And some even came and then decided not to talk to. Some came with their moms. Some started crying in the middle of their interviews. Some completed their interviews and then later requested us to delete the interviews because they were not feeling comfortable. We respected all of their requests and finally we got only 11 interviews after spending 1 year in the field. And then we found, we also conducted some focus groups. Not many people showed up, the ones who showed up didn't also talk. But these are the things that talk were really touching. One of them said that my mother taught me to stay quiet, but I'll ask my daughter to carry a knife. Look, here she didn't talk about any of her experiences, but after reading this, we can understand that something bad happened to her life. Otherwise, she wouldn't say like this. So if we, in the traditional HCI sense, when we analyze the data, we found that there are women, they wanted on-spot help, they wanted to reach out to their friends, and they felt good when they could share the experiences. But we found that the main lesson that we learned from the field didn't come from the data. It came from the absence of data, which is silence. And this is not the problem that we first discovered. Literature has been dealing with the problem for a long time. Post-colonial scholar Gayatri Spivak, for example, said that, can the subaltern speak? She was telling that even the language which evolved in the history through male-dominated society is not even rich enough to bring out the emotions of women's feeling as good as the feelings of the men. So there are different feminine feelings there, female feelings there that cannot be expressed in words because language didn't evolve that way. And then we asked this question, well, if technology also took the same path and it was also evolved in a Western world in mostly male-dominated community, can that actually help women there in Bangladesh? So first we took the very usual path. We started following all the design recommendations that found from our data. We started building a location-aware system for helping the women with the mobile phone application, which they could use for taking help if they are attacked on the street. We found that there was no map, so I started building this OpenStreetMap project in Bangladesh. Finally, we could make a good enough map. Then we had to solve this computational problem of how we could find the simplest path for a police to patrol. We solved that computational problem too. Then we built this mobile phone application which had all these features that there is this panic button, there is this first reporting options, and adding friends. If a woman is attacked in the street, they could report instantly. It would make noise. It would tell their friends that they're in trouble. And it's also had a corresponding website where we were visualizing the data, so we could see what are the harassment incidents in the city when that is happening. There's also a Facebook page corresponding to this, and there we are inviting people to join in the discussion around the sexual harassment. It went well. We started getting a lot of reports coming in, but and it was like featured in all like national, international newspapers that we are helping people. But soon we saw that these things started going awry because many women were started holding themselves back. They're like victim shaming or victim blaming there. Here one woman reported that somebody said something bad because she was not covering her head, and then the other people were saying that, well, she was right because it was your fault. And then, like there's other controversies too. When we were showing the data on the map, we thought that it would be good for people to make the awareness. We valued awareness a lot, and then the women came and say, well, you know what, my parents are now seeing that there are so many harassment incidents on the street. They're telling us now, well, stay home. You don't have to you don't need to go outside. So we tried a couple other things there, safe route suggestion, but after 6 months we actually closed down our whole system, and we said, no, this is not the answer. But it had also the commercial startup that from a couple of months after we closed down, and it's one of the most downloaded mobile phone applications in Bangladesh. But this gave us this problem that this whole HCI method, and this typical method that we know, that we collect the data, we find requirements, then we design and develop systems, and we evaluate what will happen if we don't get the data. We try to solve this problem by jumping this gap. We say, what if the women don't have to share their experiences with others? What if we teach themselves to build their own applications? So we could probably skip a couple of the steps in HCI. So a couple of my friends started this campaign there, this Coded Girl, where we tried to understand if women can build their own system or not. And then we found some limits there. We're still working on that. So it's still the question, how can we design technologies for helping this marginalized community and give them the voice? The third thing is visibility. So Spivak very famously said, who will speak is less crucial than who will listen. So we also talk a lot on social media, on Twitter, on Facebook, but who actually hears us? Who cares, right? And this also happens a lot, especially for the marginalized community, marginalized working class community. So I worked with these ready-made garments workers in Bangladesh, and I asked them first about their experiences in the factory, and they were not saying anything because they were afraid of losing their job. So instead, I asked them to drop pictures, one picture of their home and one picture of the place where they work at. And we found, we collected 63 such pictures, in one side their picture at home and one side the picture of their factory. Do you guys see any notable difference here? So the answer is when they were drawing, and it was a common pattern in each of their drawings. Whenever they were drawing their home, their factory, they are using more rigid structures like squares, triangles, circles, which is purely geometrically shaped. But whenever they were drawing their home, they're also much regular. It's more curves and free flow drawing things. So then we started asking them question, why this thing is so rigid, so straight, and then they started telling things like, you cannot do this here, you cannot do this here. We tried to understand their level of freedom from these pictures, and now we are doing this crowdsourced platform to use these pictures as a painting on the body of the rickshaws to be a pervasive display in the country to express their voice. There's another kind of visibility there which comes from this feminist argument of visibility. You know what? There's this feminists have all been saying that if you clean your room really well, then nobody will understand there was dust. So your work doesn't get any value. So visibility is important. So I worked for 3 years in the Gulistan underground market with the mobile phone repairers. I also got trained there. I worked there in a workshop, and I found there the way the mobile phone repairers were fixing the mobile phone. Their standard, a good repairing means that nobody can tell that you repaired this. So your art and craft means that it will get vanished in the air. So and that's why these people were kind of and nobody talks about this. They kind of remain invisible, although they have amazing skills of fixing mobile phones. I started documenting their art and craft, and I have been doing that for the last 3 or 4 years, and telling people that how these people can play a very crucial role in sustainability, in like the circular economy, which we care a lot these days, and how can this technology can become their technology can become a way how we can think about a sustainable development. I also work with this Uber drivers, like Ola, the shared ride drivers, and how their skills, like the taxi drivers who were here before this mobile shared application came, and how that was actually hiding their skills there. And it was the same story. I'm skipping this. Finally, the infrastructure, going very brief. So if you want to like stand for your voice, you need an identity. But like now, this global force displacement tops 50 million for the first time in the World War era too, and people lose their identity, so they lose their voice. And we are thinking, how can we make a people's identity, which is often associated with the place that they live in and the society they build, can make them portable. We conducted this ethnography in Bangladesh when we learned how people were reattaching themselves with the new infrastructure through hacking, making, and repairing. And using their knowledge, we built this mobile home concept, which won the Wholesome Sustainable Construction Award. And we tried to see how we can give people a portable identity, which is also connected with some political theory by Saila Ben Habib. So the idea is that when you move from one place to another, oftentimes a person moves alone, so they lose their identity, and that limits their voice to say something if something goes wrong against them in a new place. But how can we give them that voice if we allow them to carry their identity with them? So in future, I want to approach the sustainable development goals with this concept of voice. There are 5 goals which are directly related with voice. Gender equality, innovation and infrastructure, reducing inequality, peace and justice, and responsible consumption. And the other aspects are also indirectly related with the ideas of voice. There are a couple of projects that I'm doing now is with this autistic children, how we can give them the voice fighting superstition and stigma, which are suppressing their voice, their feelings that people do not want to come out. And we are working with these refugees and how we can handle this politics of legality, since they are often labeled as illegal and they try to hide themselves, their concerns, how we can give them voice. And then we are also working on this responsible consumption or environmental justice thing, how the work down in the post-use phase of computing can make us more aware of responsible computing. I have wonderful collaborators everywhere, and thanks to the people who funded my research. Before ending, I want to say this, my favorite quote of one of my favorite scholars, Amartya Sen, who got Nobel Prize in economics. He said, development is freedom, but through instrumental and constitutive means, which means you need technology, instruments, and then you also need the social support for recognition or building yourself to get the best out of the technology. So I asked through my research, can voice provide us such freedom, which will translate to development? Thank you all.
Thanks both Ishtiaque and Fanny. We have not too much time, but maybe a couple questions. Fanny, if you want to get up as well. If there's any questions from there, Fanny or... Yeah.
For the project about the mobile phone, you mentioned that there was a helper, and he could access the contact list of the caller.
Yeah.
How this contact list is created?
So the contact list is passed from the helper's mobile phone to the helper's mobile phone using this text messages. I was showing in brief that we.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned that they cannot read and write, but.
Yep. So this was all done in the background, so you don't understand this. So the new contact is added by the helper, not by the helpees. So if you want to add somebody new in your mobile phone, that time you call somebody and tell them that I want to add them and then your helper escalates the information of that person and saves that in your mobile phone. And this all happens remotely through SMS connection.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I'll ask Fanny one question. The last project you showed looks really amazing, the Kai 2018 sketching and binding it to visualizations, but could it also cause the problem that you might now have deceptive visualizations that you were showing in your first couple of projects, where they might not be as mechanical as a formal bar chart with axes starting at 0, and people might not know how to read them as well. So how do you sort of account for that with that newest project?
Well, we don't account for that. It's all on the shoulders of the designer of the visualization. They may make mistakes when they design a visualization, but just let me say something. All of the visualization are biased by nature. There's always going to be something that is more prominent than something else. In spite of all of the efforts you can put into the careful design of a visualization, it's always going to be biased in some way. And so it is true that it may be increased whenever you give people even more freedom over the shapes and the forms and this the goal of the project was more to unleash this creativity and have people be able to engage in making their own glyphs in the way they like. But yeah, it is true that they can make if you give this in the hands of the general population, they can make these mistakes, and that's a very good point. Actually, how do we not create these bad habits in creating this bad visualization? We don't address that in the paper, but that's a very good question to investigate. Sure, thanks.
Yeah, I have a question to Fanny.
Oh
Open the floodgates.
no. Yeah.
Yes. So if I go back to your example of sugar cubes in a Coke, I understand that you visualize so that you can understand it more. There are 6 or 7 sugar cubes that we can that are permittable to eat, and then you're making sense of data. But if you think about the consequences, what happens if we eat 2 more sugar cubes in a day? If I don't know what is the proper term in visualization. If I say that the consequences of eating 2 more cubes, the consequential visualization kind of thing. So do you think beyond that, beyond visualizing the data and extend to show that what are the consequences of the data, in terms of consequences?
Yeah, so there are some work in this space. I forgot the authors, but I guess John Farrick was part of. No, I may say, just forget what I just said. Some work by some people that I don't remember the name, which was actually visualizing the effect of eating too much sugar or salt, and it was targeted at children, and it was little guinea pigs, and a guinea pig that eat too much sugar would get very fat, and the one that gets too much of salt or something would have the fur all weird, and you would see the negative effect on the physical appearance of the pig. So visualization can be used in this sense. There's also some ways of showing, I showed just how to re-express a number in physical objects, but you can express in terms of physical activity. This is common for the actual food intake, how much you'd have to walk after eating a burger, for example, just to eliminate this. But yeah, it would rely on different cognitive mechanisms, not re-expressing. If you just want to show the impact, you can just extrapolate. If you were to eat that much all the time, it would become that big or that that looking. It's different kinds of visual.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna close things up, but I think both Fanny and Ishtiaque will be around.
Thank you very much.
In the lab, so they'll be around, or you might be able to chat with them right now. So thanks all for attending, and we'll see you next week.